What's up, everybody? This is Zachary Kruger from RotoViz, and you are joining me tonight with a very special guest I'll get to in a moment. We are on Roster Locked, Episode 6, a Best Ball show. We're going to be firing off another shot into the Underdog Fantasy Best Ball Millionaire contest tonight. And with me today is none other than Josh Larky of RotoUnderworld, of Breakout Finder, of the Codebreaker podcast. He is the Director of Analytics for PlayerProfiler.com. Awesome guy, awesome content all around. We're going to let him talk about it in a little bit. But for now, Josh, thanks for coming on. I'm very excited to be drafting with you. We finally got some brains behind the operation, and we'll probably be looking pretty good by the time this draft is all said and done.
Thanks for that intro, Zach. I'm excited. I mean, this is definitely this is the best part of our jobs is when we're just in the draft room having a good time and applying all the research and reps that we do for this type of process and just putting it in action and hoping for $1 million. So let's do this.
Yeah. I've got a couple other teams in there, mostly with teams I built with my other guests on the show. So we'll have a few more coming up here in the next couple of weeks, but we're going to enter another one tonight. Obviously, Underdog is a big partner with PlayerProfiler and RotoUnderworld. Josh, I feel like, is drafting all the time in Underdog. How many drafts do you think you're up to right now in total and for the Best Ball Mania? I'm putting you on the spot. I apologize. But
I think I've done 150 overall Underdog drafts the past 2 months.
Okay.
I think I just crossed 50 in Best Ball Mania.
Okay.
So I did a lot with the rookies and sophomores. I do a lot of just random $5 drafts, especially in March, just to get the reps going. You kind of want to do the super cheap $3 to $5 contests. And then what was the tournament called that happened in April? It was a little mini tournament for $10.
Oh my gosh. I can't even remember. I'll pull it up here real quick because I know what you're talking about.
It was the prelude to Best Ball Mania, the draft we're going to do tonight.
It was
what was that thing called?
Here. The big board. It was the big board tournament. It was a $10 tournament, I believe.
Yeah, so I think I did 20 in those. So I've just kind of spread out my exposures to the tournaments, but now it's kind of full forces ago.
I did 6 of the big boards. I don't know about you. I haven't gone back and looked at any of my teams yet on most of these things. So maybe for nostalgic purposes, at some point in time, I'll go back and I'll take a look at what I have. Maybe cry over my AJ Dillon shares in the 4th round or something like that. But before we get into the show, I always try to talk a little bit with the guest about some of their latest work or just something that they've been doing recently, because once these drafts get going, they go pretty quickly on a 30-second timer. I listened to your most recent episode of Codebreaker, which if you guys haven't checked that out, I would encourage you to do so. You can do that on RotoUnderworld Radio. Josh is the host. I believe you fly solo for every episode just about, right? The Codebreaker podcast?
I've had a few guests, but it's mostly just trying to get people into my mind and kind of how I evaluate things analytically, because, I mean, our market is so saturated with fantasy football podcasts, but everyone's always been kind of intimidated to do something that's a little bit more hardcore with the analytics. So I generally like doing stuff no one's done before, and was like, this will be kind of a unique challenge, is how do I make this interesting and funny and engaging while also giving people kind of the deeper dive into some of the back end coding work, and how do I structure some type of research project? What questions do I ask? And then what are my findings along the way? So I should have another one coming out this next week on the differences in early running backs drafted in 2018, 19, 20, and then for 2021, and how those ADPs shift and what the profiles of these players are like. So Miles Sanders was a 1st-round pick last year, kind of back end of the 1st round. Now he's going late 3rd, early 4th.
Right, 3rd, 4th.
Why is that happening? What's different in his profile now? So I think that'll be a fun one for everyone. So I'm still researching, but I think people will enjoy that one once it comes out.
Yeah, no, I think the Codebreaker is an excellent podcast. I would encourage anyone to check it out. Again, that's on the RotoUnderworld Radio. You can find Josh's Codebreaker podcast. But before we get into the Best Ball Mania tournament, I wanted to talk to you a little bit about a couple of takes I heard on this recent podcast. One of the ones I thought was most interesting, which is also probably one of the most polarizing because of the player it's about, is none other than 2021 Hall of Fame inductee Kyle Pitts of the Atlanta Falcons. He's the highly touted tight end. you had some pretty good takes on him on that podcast. And one thing that I thought was interesting was you had him projected pretty high, but the podcast came out, I think it was on May 28th, and you said if Julio Jones gets traded. And now we know that that's since happened, and you said his projections would obviously rise if that trade took place. So if you wouldn't mind, give us a little bit behind-the-scenes look of exactly what we're now looking at potentially with Kyle Pitts post-Julio Jones trade. We'd love to hear it.
Sure. So we get the projections out. So one thing that was interesting with once the Julio trade happened, there's an art to projections as well as the science behind it. And part of the art is that you have to look at who else is on the roster and who's going to fill those roles. And Julio leaving kind of opens up this X receiver, this alpha receiver type role. And Russell Gage, Olamide Zaccheaus, these are fine players. They're going to be good in a depth role, but these aren't necessarily the guys that you want to trot out on the outside ever, really. And then you have Hayden Hurst, who's actually a fully competent, average, maybe even above average, starting NFL tight end. And that's where I really started to think, you know what? Maybe grabbing a tight end at pick 4 in the NFL draft is a little bit less egregious if they don't really plan to use him as a traditional inline tight end. Maybe he's going to be playing outside sometimes, lining up against the alpha corners. Maybe he's going to be playing more of the Mike Gesicki, Darren Waller role, where he's just a pure receiver and that there's no blocking involved. So when I reprojected Kyle Pitts, I ended up giving him a 20% target share in this offense. As I was looking at historical tight ends with their rookie seasons, and you might say 20%, that is too high. Evan Engram, a far inferior talent, had a higher target share than that when he was a rookie. And that was another roster that was kind of devoid of strong depth at the position. So Engram had a pretty easy time seizing a large portion of that offense. So that's what I have for Kyle Pitts, is around a 20% target share. But the thing is, when I'm projecting nearly 650 pass attempts for Matt Ryan, because this is a pass-first offense, you're not going to be running Mike Davis between the tackles over and over again. They don't really have a typical workhorse running back. And this is just a team that year after year with Matt Ryan's top 5 in pass attempts. So a 20% target share ends up being just over 125 targets for a full season. And also remember, that sounds like a huge number, but we're also playing in a 17-game season now. So I have him projected at 128 targets, 79 catches, 959 receiving yards, and 7 touchdowns. Which, yes, that would be the most historic tight end season by a little bit when you add up the fantasy points. However, I do think that this is realistic, projecting the role I'm currently giving to Kyle Pitts, and it puts him pretty firmly in the tight end 4 spot right now, where I love TJ Hawkinson, but Kyle Pitts now moving into that number 4 spot, bumping Hawkinson down to 5. Pitts looks a lot more like George Kittle in my projections than he does TJ Hawkinson. So I kind of have Pitts now in like his own little tier where he's a little bit closer to Kittle than he is to Hawkinson in the rankings now. So maybe I am completely out of control with this rookie tight end, but he's someone who I had pretty much no exposure to in best ball and was kind of making fun of people for taking him at his ADP of around 50 on Underdog. And then the Julio trade happened and his ADP didn't change. And I adjusted my projections and rankings and was like, oh, I guess I'm going to get a good amount of Kyle Pitts now until people realize the type of role he's probably going to walk into. So that's why I'm incredibly excited now. And I've scooped up a good amount of him in my recent best ball drafts.
Yeah, no, I think you make a really good case for that. Obviously, they're extreme projections, but I don't think extreme projections necessarily have to be bad projections. If anything, it's good to obviously be a little bit bold with some of your projections because, that also kind of sets you apart. And if there's one thing that I think a lot of people know about the Player Profiler brand in particular is they do not shy away from boldness, which I think is one of the things that people love about the most. So I think, historic tight end season for Kyle Pitts sounds like it's more than in his range of outcomes just based on his athletic profile, which I pulled up here just a minute ago. I can actually get that back up in a second. Let me just pull that up here again. I did get your projections email, by the way, so we'll take a look at that in a sec. But if you take a look at it here, we can see that obviously he has.
We're doing some back end work. Oh, there we go. Yeah. Some of the column things like pop down occasionally. We're doing a lot of site changes soon. Ooh,
cool.
Look at those.
Yeah, I mean, he's an athletic freak. He obviously has, elite college, yards per reception, elite dominator rating. Obviously, the breakout age. He's an absolute god on the football field in terms of athleticism. And the other thing that I think you got to remember too, which maybe people have forgotten, which is why we were talking before the show started about how it's interesting his ADP hasn't really moved since the Julio Jones trade, which maybe is because people think of him as a traditional tight end because he has that little TE spot next to his name. But I think that it's still important to remember that also when he was coming out of the draft, there were people who were talking about after his pro day that he could very well be drafted as a wide receiver. Like people were wondering if teams would consider doing that. And now I think that with the way you're kind of projecting that this might actually happen, I think the Julio trade kind of opens that door up for that to become reality. And either people's memories are short, maybe they don't remember those conversations, or they just don't think it's possible. Maybe there's not enough sharps in these drafts who are treating him as such because they just think he will be a tight end, a traditional tight end. But I think that the projections that you lay out for him are incredibly optimistic, but I don't think that they're unrealistic. I think that it's something that could certainly happen, in a 17-game season. Now, another player who I know that you're a little bit higher on than consensus is, and I just butchered that word, consensus, is DeAndre Swift of the Detroit Lions. Obviously, there's a lot of talk going on around him when it comes to the rumors with Jamal Williams being a quote-unquote A-back, as Anthony Lynn has called him. There's concerns that perhaps the Lions may bring in Todd Gurley, which I don't know why people think he's a threat, but people tend to tilt pretty easily out there in the Twitter space these days. You don't seem to be too worried about DeAndre Swift's involvement in the Detroit Lions offense. Why don't you give us a little bit of information on that? Tell us why we can be drafting him where you're at. We're going to also look at your the player profiler underdog rankings a little bit later on, so we'll see that reflected. But before we take a look at that, where are you at on DeAndre Swift, and why are you higher on him than most are?
So with DeAndre Swift, what's really interesting is let's harken back to last season. Remember when we were so excited? I mean, I personally wasn't, but most were, about Clyde Edwards-Helaire. He was a mid-first round pick in redraft in best ball. This was the guy to have. And no, he wasn't going to be he most likely wasn't going to be a 20 carry kind of guy. He had a smaller frame, but you know what? He was going to get targets, and those are valuable, and he was playing on the Chiefs. So that's why he was getting taken at like pick 5 to pick 8 in that range. Round 1. DeAndre Swift does not project to get 20 carries a game, just like Clyde Edwards-Helaire. I would actually say in this offense, with how devoid the Lions are of any quality receivers, Swift projects to actually be more involved in the passing game this year than people were projecting for Helaire last year. And I would say that Swift looks like the kind of guy that's still going to be getting, 10 to 12 carries a game. He had a lot of weeks last year, once he was fully integrated in the offense, where he was getting 14, 15, 16 carries in those games. So even if I'm only projecting him for 11, 12 carries a game because of the super scary Jamal Williams, he still is going to be getting all those targets. So if you're able to get him early to mid to late third round, what am I missing here? Was CEH truly being projected as a small back for 5 to 10 more touchdowns than Swift, and that's why you had to get him round 1? It really doesn't make any sense to me. I get it. This isn't a great offense in Detroit, but they should have a top 10 run-blocking offensive line. They drafted Penei Sewell. They were already a really good offensive line last year. I don't think this offense is going to be nearly as terrible as people think, because one thing Goff needs is time, protection, and he's going to have that in Detroit. So what I have with Swift right now is I have him projected for a little under 200 carries. And the big one, though, is that I have him projected for 84 targets. And I would actually take the over if I had to choose where I would sit with that projection. But it puts him at nearly 70 catches. And I don't think that's unrealistic. Who's catching the ball there? TJ Hawkinson? Tyrell Williams, who didn't play last year and barely played the year before? Rashad Perriman's never played a full season before. Quintez Cephas, I don't know how to pronounce his name. A day 3 pick who runs a 4.7. Is that really are these?
And the top waiver wire ad after week 1 last year when he saw 10 targets unprecedentedly. That was a fun one to watch as well. But I'm sorry, go ahead. Continue.
Yeah, there's always one or two like random week 1, like you got to add this guy. And it's like, you know what? The Lions probably thought it was funny to have Quintez getting all those targets because no one expected it on the defense.
Yeah. Oh,
but
for sure.
yeah, this is a day 3 wide receiver that runs a 4.7. We can't get too excited about him. So I see Swift being so heavily involved in the passing game. He had about as many red zone and goal line touches per game last year as Nick Chubb did per game. Unbelievable. Sure, the offense is going to take a step back most likely without Stafford, Golladay, and Jones, but we should see a step forward from Hawkinson, a step forward from Swift. Goff isn't fully incompetent, an improved offensive line. I really like DeAndre Swift to be top 3 in the NFL in targets for the running back position. And from all my research and from scraping through all the play-by-play data, a running back target on average gives you 2.5 times as many fantasy points as a running back rush attempt. So you need to smash the draft button on DeAndre
That's a good
Swift.
stat. That's a very nice stat. Just curious, we'll move on to the next player in a second, but where do you have Jamal Williams ranked roughly, or in terms of targets? Do you think that he is still a viable like late round option for those who maybe are getting him as a 0 RB guy? If you don't have the particular ones right up in front of you, but do you know roughly what you might have him as?
Yeah, totally. I think Jamal Williams.
Of course you do. You're Josh Larky. Of course you do.
Jamal Williams is gonna have a great season.
Okay.
I think he's gonna get. So I have Swift at like 193 carries. I have Jamal Williams at 135. I think it's going to be a fairly split backfield. I still have Jamal Williams at nearly 50 targets. I mean, he's a good pass blocker. He's a good pass catcher. And there's just going to be so much work to go around in this offense where they don't have the wide receiver core that you'd expect from a typical offense. So, yeah, I think Jamal Williams, I believe he's going around 130 range right now on Underdog. And I think that's a great place to grab him. I mean, Jamal Williams looks like the perfect running back to grab as one of your 3rd, 4th, 5th backs where he has standalone value week to week, and he's probably getting you 7 to 12 fantasy points. And if something happens to Swift, he could just take off. We saw him in Green Bay anytime he got the spot start because Jones was injured, 6, 7 targets a game. So I really like both these running backs and Hawkinson. Pretty much the entire Lions offense, honestly, I think is a little undervalued on Underdog because everyone just kind of assumes that they're going to be so dreadful without realizing that it's likely a pretty consolidated offense, which is what we want in fantasy. We want to know that there's not a lot out there and that Hawkinson, Swift, Jamal Williams are probably going to get a hell of a lot more work than just like the casual fantasy gamer thinks they will because they go, oh, gross, it's the Lions.
Yeah, well, I think too, it's also kind of worth considering that we obviously tend to fade the bad offenses. Like, I don't think anyone's really chasing much of Houston outside of Brandon Cooks, and that might not even work out if Tyrod Taylor's just quarterback. Like, we don't even know if that's going to go well, but we're at least optimistic that maybe that one would work out. But even over the years, we've seen bad teams and we've seen stereotypically bad offenses produce, some fantasy goodness throughout the course of the season. One of the ones that immediately comes back to my mind, and I can't remember the year, I want to say it was maybe 2015, was an awful Browns team where Josh McCown and Gary Barnidge were just like going like nuts week in and week out when they were trailing by like 20 points and throwing the ball 50 times a game. And that could be what we're looking at in Detroit, kind of as another bargain team with an undervalued quarterback because of his name and his lack of recent success. Not playing on a good team, even just playing in a tough division by all accounts. I mean, it's not like the NFC North is the easiest division. It's not a tough division compared to some others, but they're not going to compete in that division. So they're going to be in a lot of games where they're going to have to, throw the ball and try to maintain pace with the game environment. And I think that maybe if I'm not as high on the Lions wide receivers, because there's not a lot of reason to be, you can still find those parts where within that offense, you're going to get fantasy production. And I think that DeAndre Swift, I think you made a really good point. Like, he could very well be like the number 1 or number 2 pass catching target in that offense. I mean, I know you only have him projected for about 84 targets. I would assume a wide receiver might get more than that, but they very well may not because TJ Hawkinson could also be getting a lot of targets. So you could be looking at the number one and number two pass catching targets on the Lions offense being a tight end and a running back. So I don't think that even that's all that crazy. Like he's a talented player. I think that also being high on him, you're probably betting on efficiency a little bit just because of his skill set compared to maybe Jamal Williams, that even if he is going to lose touches to Jamal Williams, DeAndre Swift will hopefully be able to be an efficient player in the spots that he's given to get you into the end zone and make some plays. So I like the DeAndre Swift take. I'm with you on the Lions offense. I think they're a little undervalued. I have not been getting a lot of them, but maybe, just maybe, you might change that for us tonight. We'll find out here in a couple minutes. One more player I want to talk about is Travis Etienne, who you said you had a little bit to say about him. I recently participated in a mock draft, and I was surprised to see when I was doing the mock draft, I was looking at the RotoViz rankings. Sean Siegel, I believe, has him ranked in the redraft as the RB10. I'm not sure where you're at on him for the 2021 season. I thought that was pretty bold, but I'm also not going to bet against Sean Siegel too often. So when I was at the point in my draft where I was like, I could take another running back, Etienne was there. He was obviously not going as the RB10 in that draft, so I went ahead and took a flyer on him, and now I'm just kind of sitting back and waiting to see what happens. But you said you're also pretty high on him as well. So let's get into that a little bit. I'd even be curious to hear about how you go about projecting someone who's a rookie player in a rookie head coach's offense where there's a lot that we don't know, and we got to assume a lot to make these projections happen.
Yeah, I'll try and touch on all that. So first, I think RB10, it's very bold. I kind of see that as like the ceiling though. So I have Etienne projected. He ended up being like a back end RB2. I think he was like the 22nd or 23rd best projection for running back. But I have him ranked higher than that because I do think there's a lot of upside in his projection. Just the same with Swift. If you're the kind of guy that profiles to be a pass catching running back, your ceiling is just going to be so much immensely higher than so many other players. And that let's just say that there's no injuries in fantasy football next year at all. I would say Etienne would have a higher ceiling than even somebody like a Nick Chubb. Because if Kareem Hunt's healthy, Nick Chubb's only getting 20 to 30 targets. But there's a world where even with healthy James Robinson, they say, you know what? You're the undrafted guy. You have no pass catching pedigree that's even remotely close to Etienne. And we're actually kind of competitive this year because remember, this division's terrible. I don't think Jacksonville is going to make the playoffs, but we think the Titans are going to be good, especially with Julio now, but it's still a pretty dreadful defense and actually kind of a shallow depth chart all around. The Colts, we have no idea what to expect with Carson Wentz. It's a good roster where when the biggest question is quarterback, who knows what can happen. Houston's going to lose every game this year. So you can actually make a case for why the Jaguars could be sneaky competitive and lean on their best players. So I did some research on looking at how many targets and receptions running backs get in college and how that translates to the NFL. And where Travis Etienne set up, he's very likely going to have multiple seasons above 60 catches. Just kind of like on average for a player of his profile. And I think he's better than the average early round pick who's good at pass catching. I mean, this guy had almost 600 receiving yards this past season and 48 catches. He's reunited with Trevor Lawrence, his college quarterback, for 3 seasons at Clemson. So he's already going to have familiarity with the guy that he's lining up behind. So I have Travis Etienne at 162 rush attempts and 74 targets right now. And that's assuming that James Robinson will be decently involved. There's always the chance that James Robinson's not that involved. The average round 1 running back pick over the past decade gets 18 touches per game in their rookie season. Wow. So that could be like 13 carries and 5 targets for Etienne. Who knows how that's going to shake out? Maybe he'll be a touch under that because he's not the typical like super bell cow, prototypical size type running back that's taken round 1. But it just shows you that in general, if a team invests first round draft capital into a running back nowadays, they use them. I don't buy this third down back thing. I mean, Urban Meyer said Carlos Hyde is the first and second down back at one point. Do we really think Carlos Hyde's getting 200 carries this year?
I'm not sure he honestly makes the roster. I mean, he might, but
there's a chance Carlos Hyde is like Mark Ingram, where he gets 5 carries a game the first 6 weeks, and then they say, oh yeah, that's right, you're in your 30s and not very good anymore. Why are we still giving you touches when we have an incredibly explosive young running back? So I love the upside for ETN. He's an absolute smash in round 4 and round 5. I get him mid to late round 5 frequently on Underdog. And I mean, this looks like a league-winning type running back.
I think that's around where he's going to. There's around the 4th or the 5th. Is he not? I mean, let me see. Travis Etienne. Yeah, I mean, yeah. So 50th overall. So that's early round 5 draft capital. It's not a bad place to get him. Like we said, he has the receiving upside. If you just look at his profile here on PlayerProfiler real quick, 87 percentile target shares, just ridiculous. Strong college yards per carry, high dominator rating, not the highest, but he probably isn't getting a lot of touches with how much he's putting up, with these numbers. He tends to be a home run hitter every time, so you're not going to get as many opportunities when you're scoring every time you touch the ball because you're just so efficient. And
got a stat for you.
What's that?
About his efficiency. Yeah, here's a fun stat.
Yeah.
Every 9.8 college rush attempts, Travis Etienne scored a running touchdown. That's how explosive he was. Less than 1 every 10 carries, he had a touchdown.
That's the Antonio Gibson type stat right there. Wasn't Antonio Gibson like 1 out of every 9 touches he scored a touchdown or something like that? I think it was.
Something crazy, except that Etienne had like 600 college carries or whatever, or 550 college carries, and Gibson had 33. So
right, Gibson had, I think it was 77 career college touches. So yes, definitely different players in terms of the volume, but perhaps a little bit more similar than some realize in terms of the efficiency and the explosiveness. Before we do anything else, because we don't know how quickly this fills, we're going to do a little something. Before we get into this draft, we are going to walk people through. So if you're tuning in, we're going to walk people through how exactly they can get custom rankings put into Underdog. It's a really awesome feature that Underdog has put in for this year, I believe. I think it's new to them this year. And they have that available to us. Let me just go back to the homepage here. We'll walk you all the way through it. So if you go to the Underdog homepage, if you're sitting here, you go to the rankings. You're going to go down to the NFL on the left-hand side, and then you're going to click on CSV Upload Download. Now, Josh has already been kind enough today to send us the Player Profiler Underdog Best Ball rankings. So we're actually getting a little sneak peek of these things tonight for the show. We're going to plug them in and do it, but we're going to go to the CSV Download, then we're going to go to CSV Upload here. We're going to click it. I went ahead and put them on my desktop. These are the ones that Josh just sent me. We're going to upload them. We're going to save it. Does that look correct, Josh?
Looks good to me.
All right, we're going to save those in there. And now when we get into our draft, we're going to have the exclusive Player Profiler Underdog Best Ball rankings for our draft tonight. We're going to draft with those. I'm going to kind of trust Josh to walk us through some of these guys. He is definitely a little bit smarter than I am when it comes to this stuff. I trust him. I do enough of drafting teams on my own. I can pick my guys anytime I want to. I like to kind of do my drafts where I let my guests take a little bit of control. I'll offer some input here and there, and certainly include who I like. But we're going to go ahead and get into a draft.
Oh, you're in a slow draft, aren't you?
I don't want to be in a slow draft. I can tell you that. Is that a slow draft?
My color scheme is flipped from yours. Just ignore me.
Okay. I say that's a slow draft. 30 seconds per pick. Okay. We're okay. So we're going to get into that. We're going to drop $25 more in there. We got this thing already halfway filled. So if you're not currently in it, and I'll tweet it out real quick just so people know. But if you're not in this draft already and you're interested, you can go ahead and get in this Underdog fantasy draft with Josh and I real quick. We're going to fire that off. Josh, do you have anything else you want to add on anybody before we get in there? Who's a player who you're most exposed to right now in these drafts as we get ready to head off into the back nine of this tournament before the season gets ready to kick off?
So I'd say like 2 of my highest exposure early players. One is Swift right now. We'll talk about Akers in a little bit, but the other round 3 guy, aside from Swift, is Michael Thomas.
Okay.
I don't know what I'm missing about Michael Thomas, but this looks like a guy who has as good a case as anyone to lead the NFL in targets overall. There is nobody else there in that offense. We have a multi-year track record of Michael Thomas commanding 28 to 31% target shares. Yeah. Why shouldn't I draft Michael Thomas? He has potentially even a quarterback upgrade. I mean, Drew Brees wasn't letting Michael Thomas run a full route tree because of his noodle arm. Now he gets Jameis Winston. And Jameis Winston is not the kind of quarterback that's going through his first, second, third, fourth read. No. If the hot route receiver is Michael Thomas, Jameis Winston is going to lock in on Michael Thomas and make sure Michael Thomas catches the ball. Jameis is not going to see Michael Thomas marginally open and say, oh, it's all right, I'll throw somewhere else. He's going to throw to Michael Thomas. And you know what? Most of the time, Michael Thomas is probably going to have some pretty good separation. So he's going to be open. And I think this is actually going to be a sneaky, really good fit for Michael Thomas to kind of unlock just what kind of receiver he can be with his route tree, where in limited samples, he's been elite when running non-slant routes, believe it or not.
Yeah. No, I've been also drafting a lot of Michael Thomas. I think that he is obviously still an elite talent. I'm not as concerned about him losing Drew Brees. Like you said, it could even be an upgrade. And even when he lost Drew Brees a couple years ago with Teddy Bridgewater, if my memory serves me correct, I don't think Teddy Bridgewater hurt Michael Thomas all that badly. If anything, Teddy Bridgewater maybe gave Michael Thomas a chance to do a little bit more because he probably had a little bit more zip on the ball and was able to move the ball downfield a little bit further in ways that Drew Brees simply couldn't. Drew Brees during the last couple of years of his career was not known for his deep ball and working on those sides of the field. He was definitely keeping it short and in the intermediate parts of the fields to Michael Thomas. And I think too that I think sometimes we get hung up on the thing like the nickname like Slant Boy. Like it's a fun nickname to throw around. Like I've definitely used it, even though I'm drafting Michael Thomas. I'm not taking it as like a knock on him. I think sometimes players get reputations based off of silly things when maybe we don't consider the fact that the reason they're getting that reputation is from an outside force that's requiring them to operate in a specific area of the field or play in a specific way because the talent around them simply doesn't offer them the opportunity to maybe do what they're fully capable of. I think if you want to maybe consider another offensive player in this case, maybe Lamar Jackson is a player like that this year. People are talking about how they need to try to throw the ball more. They need to get that receiver talent going. Lamar Jackson runs a ton. He averages over 10 rushes a game for his career. He is clearly the Konami code king as he heads into year 4. I don't think anyone will ever be dethroning him, but that wide receiver talent in Baltimore has not been there for him. Now, I'm still skeptical of Baltimore throwing enough to make wide receivers there as fantasy relevant as we would like. I'm not necessarily going to go out there and say that I think Lamar Jackson is going to have a 1,000-yard receiver this year. Maybe not any year in his career. But I think that even if we see that those pieces around him are more efficient, that maybe Lamar Jackson kind of casts aside a little bit that reputation as being more of a running quarterback than a passing quarterback, and is at least respected as a good thrower of the football if he has weapons around him to do that.
Yeah, I think that someone like Rashad Bateman is actually starting to turn into an okay player to draft at ADP where, this is a first-round pick. We know historically that first-round picks generally command pretty high target shares their rookie season. We don't think they're going to pass a lot. They might pass a little bit more than expected, but I do think Rashad Bateman is going to be their top target this year, more than Mark Andrews. This is a true alpha number 1 receiver. He runs the full route tree. Do we really think Marquise Brown is going to out-target him? Marquise Brown's like ideal fit in the NFL is kind of like a stretch deep threat type player. He's not really the kind of guy that you want to pepper with targets. So I think Lamar Bateman's kind of interesting because I think Andrews at his ADP is a little bit worrisome. We saw last year when he didn't have the insane touchdown efficiency what happened. And something that I thought was interesting when looking at Andrews, Mark Andrews' target share in 2020 was really good. Mark Andrews had a higher target share in 2020 than he did the year before. But he didn't have the touchdowns. The passing volume dropped a little bit, and Mark Andrews was really disappointing. So I think it's kind of interesting in that sense where I think Bateman's sort of becoming the really good value, and where Andrews, I don't think you should just completely avoid him. I think he's fine to have some exposure to. But I think with Andrews, you really have to bank more on touchdowns than overall usage, which is a little worrisome for me to do. Whereas with Bateman, even if he has 4 or 5 touchdowns, I think he can really crush at his ADP.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I just drafted him on a team today where I got Mark Andrews, Bateman, and I think I even ran it back with, I want to say Tylen Wallace or Sammy Watkins late. I can't completely remember, but I thought that was kind of a fun little build to do. It's something different than what I normally do. So I'm with you there. I think that Bateman is a guy to get. Marquise Brown is going ahead of him right now, so he's a value just in terms of where he's being taken at. I think is around wide receiver 60, and he could be the target leader for what's still going to be a really good offense, even if it's not the most high volume passing offense.
One thing I like with Marquise Brown and why I don't take him and why I like that his ADP is still above Bateman. Mm-hmm. Marquise Brown is the classic, he's better in best ball kind of receiver.
Yes.
When he had his insane run last year, where he had, I think it was like 7 or 8 straight games with a touchdown, he never had a top 12 finish as a wide receiver. He didn't have a wide receiver 1 week in that span.
Yeah.
So the better and best ball guy who had insane touchdown efficiency last year with an over 30% target share during those games still never gave you a top end week. So that just kind of shows you that it's a mirage.
I don't think Marquise Brown had a single wide receiver 1 week in 2020, if I'm not mistaken.
I think you're right. Yeah, I just remember looking at that big touchdown stretch, and he never hit 20 fantasy points. Like this is just not the type of player that's capable of doing that consistently. Whereas Bateman, it's much more likely that he's going to be the guy that strings together multiple 70, 80, 90, 100-yard receiving games. Marquise Brown's not really that guy.
Yeah, I think he was a fake alpha, typecasted into a role where because he was a number 1 overall draft pick, he was simply just going to be the alpha receiver. And that obviously doesn't make any sense at the size that he's at and the volume that he's seeing. Josh, we're about to be on the clock. At the 107, we're playing in the Best Ball Mania 2 tournament on Underdog Fantasy. We're looking at the player profiler rankings. We are on the clock now, Josh. Do we want to get your boy here, and then we can talk a little bit about him?
Yeah, let's do it. We're going to follow the rankings early on. We're going to grab – I know you're wondering, like, Jonathan Taylor's on the board. Why would you grab Cam Akers, right? We messed up, didn't we? I mean, we didn't grab Jonathan Taylor, the league winner from last year.
We're setting money on fire, dude. We're setting it on fire.
So Jonathan Taylor played 2 incredibly soft run defenses when he had his blow-up games from last year. Incredible talent. I love the player. But Nyheim Hines is there. I don't really think that guy's going away. And as we've already talked about, running back targets are just so precious. They're 2.5 times more valuable than running back rush attempts. And I don't know how many targets Jonathan Taylor's going to get. I also don't know how good that offense is going to get. What's his touchdown upside going to be like? Whereas with the Rams, we know that's going to be a ridiculous offense. I mean, if this has been a good offense the last few years with Jared Goff, imagine Matthew Stafford hopping in there, who's a significantly better quarterback.
Yeah.
It's going to be bananas. Cam Akers is the clear lead back there. He single-handedly, as a rookie, won a playoff game for them when they basically just leaned on him and gave him 25 carries a game. The final 5 or 6 games, if you include the playoffs with Akers, he was on pace for, I think, 400 or 500 receiving yards based on his per-game averages. He was on pace for, I think, probably 400-something rush attempts, which obviously he's not going to hit. But the idea is that this is a team where, for some reason, McVay hates bell cows, according to everyone. Yet they forget that Todd Gurley was the RB1 in fantasy, I think 2 years in a row.
Yeah.
Cam Akers looks like he's going to smash. He's better than Darrell Henderson. This is the guy that's going to be getting close to 300 carries with 50, 60 targets on potentially a top 5 offense in football, where there's also an incredibly strong defense. So there's just no path to Akers ever getting game scripted out. And I just think he's going to be one of the top 3 to top 5 running backs in total touches with a healthy amount of targets. I mean, Akers' college target share was better than Todd Gurley. So everyone's saying but Gurley was such an elite receiver, needs to remember.
Hey, Josh, real quick. Yeah, real quick, we're on the clock. I'll let you finish up that thought. We got 24 seconds here. Where do you want to go with this next pick?
I think we can just stick to the rankings. I think we can go 2 running backs, and then we can probably start pounding receivers. I mean,
so we want Harris?
I think we should go Harris. Do you think he's going to get under 300 carries? Because I certainly don't.
I think that We'll take him. I think that it's going to be interesting to see what happens there. Mike Tomlin, you want to talk about how people have the narrative of Sean McVay not liking bell cow running backs, which, like you said, that is a completely phony narrative. First of all, that's not. Todd Gurley lost carries because he has arthritic knees, and down the back half of the season, he wasn't getting the carries that he was. That has nothing to do with Sean McVay not liking lead backs, but certainly I think that we've seen over the years that Mike Tomlin does love his lead backs. James Conner was not that great, but even, there were a couple seasons where he was better than he has been recently. And when he was solid, he was the guy there. He had, lots of touches, lots of receptions. You can probably quote me the numbers. I'm not quite that mind there, but I know that James Conner was good because I definitely watched him on some teams that I didn't have him on, and I was jealous I was missing out on him. But bottom line is James Conner was the guy, and it wasn't until he kind of started to show a decline over the last year or two where they started to kind of pivot off of him and just focus a little bit more on the passing game down the stretch. But I think that Najee Harris, he's a first-round running back. You just gave a really great stat. I forget what the number was exactly. Was it 18.5 carries per game or 18.5 opportunities per game?
Yeah, I think it's 18 touches per game for these round one rookies.
Yeah, so I mean, Najee Harris, he fits that role. So if that number holds even close to what it's historically been, I think that there's no problem with being in on Najee Harris, this early in the draft. Good rookie running back, decent profile. I think he's a guy who we would like. So I'm fine with taking him. I'm not sure where you're at with your projections on him. We're going to be on the clock in a second, but do you have him projected for 300 touches?
I haven't projected over 300 touches. I think he's going to be the kind of running back that is above average. ETN might be a little below the average of 18 touches a game. I think Harris looks like he'll be above. The other thing is he's a sneaky receiver. He actually had a higher best season college target share than ETN did, which blew me away when I saw that. Najee Harris is a legitimate all-purpose back. So that's what I'm excited about, is that this is a very pass-heavy team in Pittsburgh. We know that Big Ben's going to throw it 600-something times. And I think Najee Harris is kind of a sneaky guy that's probably going to get 50 to 70 targets and kind of shock people because they didn't realize that he had a 13% target share in college.
All right, we are up again, currently with 2 running backs already taken. We just lost Michael Thomas. Do we want to follow the rankings? Do we want to go Allen Robinson here at wide receiver to get that first receiver off the board?
I think we should stick with Swift. I mean, It's a gift. If he falls to you at pick 31, I think we just have to take him.
All right. And you just laid out a really good case for him. For those of you who maybe weren't tuning in earlier, Josh went over 3 different players who he is a little bit higher on than some. He also gave some really good projections for Kyle Pitts, but he did make mention that there's a good possibility that we could see, based on his projections, DeAndre Swift going for over, I think it was 84 targets this season, which would obviously be
84.
Yeah, 84 targets, which is really great for a PPR back. On top of that, I think he had him for about 130 carries. So you're looking at over 200 touches for a talented running back in an offense that's going to need to find ways to get the ball in players' hands with the underwhelming wide receiver core. Derek Brown is tuning in right now. He's telling me that I need to go grab myself a drink because I said if we draft 3 straight running backs, I'm going to need to start drinking. This is not a busy draft, as some would call it. But,
we will. I was going to say we'll have to start pounding some receivers. I can't pass up Swift when he's falling to the second half of the 3rd round. This looks like the kind of guy in previous years, if you just look at his profile, that would be going early round 2 in other seasons.
Yeah,
there's just something about him being on the Lions and a couple quotes taken semi out of context about Jamal Williams, and it spooked people.
Yeah. The Anthony Lynn quote, if I'm not mistaken, the out of context quote was him calling him like a back, and it was not him saying that he views Jamal Williams as a number 1 running back, but he was almost kind of like typecasting a running back and just using like a letter system essentially to name what kinds they are. Maybe a bruiser back's an A back, a satellite back's a B back, or something like that. He wasn't calling him the alpha back on the Lions, and a lot of people took that out of context. I would even wonder if it wasn't for the signing of Jamal Williams, if it wasn't for these silly comments being taken out of context, I think DeAndre Swift probably is going in the second round if you take those two factors out, and if they're going with maybe a guy who we haven't seen fantasy production from in previous seasons.
All right, we're almost on the clock. I'm liking Pitts here. I'm liking Lockett or Woods or Chase. What are you thinking? Do you have a preference out of these guys?
I'm all for following the rankings here. I am not against taking Kyle Pitts here. It would be, a little bit before ADP, but not enough to matter. We can call him our elite tight end. We don't have to draft another one anytime soon after that. If you want to take Kyle Pitts, we can do it.
Zach, this is your call. You're already out of your comfort zone. We did 3 straight running backs. All you.
Josh, listen. I already called you the brains of the operation here. I'm having you on here. We're gonna get some good picks, some good rankings. I trust you to make these picks and to guide us through the lobby and help us find the light at the end of this tunnel. So I'm fine with going Kyle Pitts here. I don't think that there's any mistaking what he could bring to Atlanta this upcoming year. And even then, I know we just recently said what your projections were for him post Julio draft or post Julio trade, but before the Julio trade, I believe your projections had him at around 700 yards and like 5 or 6 touchdowns. So if we're even going to assume that is possible, the low ends on that are still pretty high to kind of make him, I think, more or less worth this pick right here. Would that be about accurate? That even if he hit your lower end projections with Julio on the team, that would still be kind of worth it? Is that close to being worth the tight end 4 pick?
Yeah, it would probably be like a touch under value. However, it's hard to capture sometimes, even if you say like, oh, he didn't really hit exactly what we wanted to.
Yeah.
What's nice with the tight end is that, the position's so bad, and I don't think there's any world where Pitts doesn't have a good tight end 1 caliber season. I think we're at least getting like a tight end 8 or better season out of him. So we're going to get something difference making. Even if it's like like 700 something yards.
Yeah.
That's still a fine tight end to have as your stud tight end. And that, yes, there were better picks to be made, but it doesn't mean that your roster in any way is sunk. I'm doing some research right now. We have a minute. Let me pull this up.
Sure.
I was looking at the 2020 Best Ball Mania, so this tournament last year. And let me knock your socks off with a couple wonky builds that finished first or second in their 12-man draft and advanced in the tournament.
All right.
We had someone go 1 quarterback, 3 running backs, 11 receivers, and 3 tight ends. A 1-3-11-3 build. That advanced in the tournament. We had someone go, here's a great one. 2 quarterback, 9 running back, 4 receiver, 3 tight end. That advanced. And I'm not saying that these are builds that you should ever be doing, but the idea is like the idea is more, I want people to take away that there's margin for error. You don't have to be perfect. And I think Kyle Pitts is a very safe player to finish as a fairly elite tight end option this season.
Yeah, that's actually – I'm assuming you can't see the actual names of the rosters that were on those teams. I'd be curious to know if they're there. Can you see the players on there actually?
Not on my current screen. I could probably pull those up later, but I was just looking at some of the builds and chuckling before this.
That's pretty amazing, though. We are about to be on the clock again. We're currently sitting with 3 running backs and a tight end. We have to go wide receiver here, correct?
Yeah, I was going to say we could do – I like T. Higgins a lot.
Okay.
I think he's like – this is a potential alpha receiver. So I like him here. I like Deontay. So if you want to do receiver, I think those are both pretty good options.
Yeah, I'm gonna go with T. Higgins here. I do like him for several reasons. One of which I think that you can obviously hopefully stack him with the better quarterback in Burrow if we want to look into getting some stacks down the line, which I think is kind of an ideal way to obviously tackle these tournaments. Also, the way that the ADP is spaced out for these Bengals players, you could really – Chase is already off the board, but you could conceivably get like all 3 Bengals receivers and Joe Burrow if the draft fell to you, right? They're kind of all spaced out in their individual rounds. So it's a pretty easy stack to get if you're paying attention to what you're doing, unless someone gets crazy. So if Burrow is a guy who we do want to pair with Higgins later on down the road, we can probably make that happen. Deontay Johnson means you have to, possibly pair him with Big Ben. I do love Deontay Johnson, but, and we don't also have to stack with necessarily the quarterback. We can talk about that too. But you actually, before we had gotten on, maybe we'll talk about it now because we're at least on the stack topic, talked about, fading the draft a little bit and getting your stacks later on rather than necessarily investing early picks in the draft. So why don't you talk a little bit about, why we wanted to cover that, why it's something that you thought was important to talk about, because I've thought more about it recently, but I don't think I've completely contextualized my thoughts and why it's something I've considered more over the last couple of weeks. Clearly you have, you were reading my mind because it's something that I've been thinking about. And like I said, I haven't completely put into context. So if we're looking to stack players, and you even talked about this on Codebreaker, if I remember, with the Buccaneers. So Antonio Brown was the example I think you used. But looking to stack players later on in the draft rather than early in drafts, why is that a good way to build rosters and gain an edge in these kind of tournaments?
So one thing that I've noticed from drafting a lot is that the high-end stacks, people frequently reach for them. And that you're often not going to get the super sexy stacks that you're – you're not always going to get the Cowboy stack. You won't always get Allen Diggs. You're not always going to get like Mahomes and Tyreek Hill or Mahomes and Kelsey. The idea is that there's frequently people, I see it every single draft, where they'll go around early, 2 rounds early to secure a quarterback or to secure a receiving option. And I mean, we have years and years of historical data. And it turns out, I mean, I'm not saying that everyone's great at this, but we're pretty good in general at a round 1 pick generally outscores a round 2 pick, which outscores a round 3 pick, etc. And if you're reaching heavily in those earlier rounds, I'm just going to grab value. And that if I see people completely going out of bounds and taking, like if someone snipes us on, I'll finish this in a second.
Yeah, where do we want to go here? We obviously can't do Hawkinson. We don't really need running back. I'm not against Wilson, Hurts, or Herbert. I kind of like Herbert with Mike Williams. That's my thought. I'll give you the next 10 seconds here, then we'll make our pick.
Yeah, we could go Herbert. Why not?
All right, let's go Herbert. I think that he's a guy that you can also, again, stack with people earlier. But finish up your thought on what you're talking about with going with later round stacks, not trying to reach on players to make stacks happen. You're obviously, I think what you're about to say is sacrificing a lot of upside with these reaches. But I'm going to let you finish up your thought there.
Yeah, essentially, like the correlation that you gain generally seems to be outweighed by the value that you lose. So, yes, it would be incredible if we happen to have Chase, Burrow, Higgins, and we're like, oh, our next pick after Boyd has to be Burrow, and we end up grabbing him a couple rounds early. There were probably some pretty legitimate quarterbacks there. And there's also a really good chance that you have to remember with waiting, if you have some good players locked up, you don't necessarily need to reach for the quarterback because there's very few other people out there incentivized to reach for the quarterback. If you have a high-end receiver, or even if you have the secondary option, let's just say that we have Tyler Lockett.
Yeah.
And we're considering Russ. We don't need to necessarily take Russ around early because the only other person in the draft at that moment who's heavily incentivized to reach on Russ is the one with DK Metcalf. We don't even know if they're going to reach on Russ or not. But right there, it's basically you're only looking at like one potential submarine that's going to bomb you. It's not like you're surrounded and everyone's trying to steal Russ from you. And I think that's what people don't really understand when they think about it is they're like, oh man, like everyone's going to wreck my stack. No, they're not. Like it's called a snipe because it's kind of rare and it's annoying.
Yeah.
When people pay $25, they're not incentivized to light that money on fire and draft a hilariously uncorrelated and bad roster just to get you back. That's not what they're trying to do. Like they want a good team too. So why are they going to reach on your quarterback if they don't have any receiving options paired with them?
Right. So, no, that makes sense.
Kind of twofold where you don't want to necessarily sacrifice value. So sometimes those high-end stacks are difficult to achieve. And then I think those like second and third tier stacks will be a little less common. And I think they're just as viable. I mean, if a quarterback has a great game, it's unlikely that only the number one receiver in that offense has a great game. There's a really good chance like the second or third guy catches a big touchdown. So that's kind of the idea behind it.
Yeah, no, I'm completely on board with you. That's not something I had thought about much until more recently. I'll get into that in a second. We're going to be on the clock here. Where do we want to go with this next pick? Are we looking at another wide receiver to add to our lone T. Higgins right now? Because I think that's where I'm kind of tilting
towards. I was going to say, I like the idea of going Hurts here. Hurts is someone that I actually have ranked as like the 60th or 61st best player. We lock up a 2-quarterback build. We know we can get Rager in several rounds, which I think is nice. And right now we have 2 potential top 5 quarterbacks. And one thing strategically with Underdog is if you look at other platforms, believe it or not, the quarterbacks on Underdog frequently go later in ADP than other platforms. Yet it's half PPR. Most best ball platforms are going to be full PPR, and non-quarterback players are actually scoring more relative points. So I like the idea that right now, while the quarterbacks go later on Underdog than other platforms, I like capitalizing on what I think is potential value there, where the quarterbacks score just as many points on Underdog as FFPC, DraftKings, etc. Yet the running backs, receivers, tight ends score more points on the other platforms. So I like that idea of if you can get those 30 to 35 point quarterback weeks, most weeks, which I think we're going to get with Herbert and Hurts, it's kind of a nice advantage there, especially when we're not reaching on. I mean, we got Hurts a pick after ADP. It's not like we're reaching to lock in 2 quarterbacks, even though I think and have Hurts projected as an early round 6 option.
Yeah, and obviously, Herbert is fine there too. It says we reached on him by about 4 picks, but you have to know you're probably not getting him back. I think that I'm also very confident in Justin Herbert and what he's going to bring to the table in 2021. So getting him 4 picks earlier in ADP really isn't really much of a reach. I want to show you something in a second after we make this pick, because I want to show you what I had touched on a couple of weeks ago, maybe like a week or so ago. The episode might not even be out yet with Colin Kelly. We're currently doing a RotoViz Best Ball podcast called the Best Ball Show. I'm not sure if you've tuned in or not, but we're kind of trying to do a evergreen series where people who maybe aren't familiar with the format, they can tune in and listen to episodes and kind of get their bearings with the best ball format, but also make it actionable for people who are maybe familiar with the format but maybe haven't either heard some of the things we talk about, or maybe they don't subscribe to RotoViz, the website, so maybe they're not as familiar with some of these things that we're talking about. But one of the things that made me consider fading the later round or fading for the later round stack was a tool that we have at RotoViz. I just want to show you after we we'll make our next 2 picks, just because we're going to be on the clock shortly after again with round 9. Where do we want to go right here?
Look, we got Chenault upcoming, I think. Are you in on Chenault this year?
I'm fine with Chenault. I know everyone loves him. He's not a player who I had much of in drafts, but it's not because I disliked him. It's just one of those things that usually what happens with Chenault, I feel like, is people are always – we're going to go ahead and take him real quick. People, I feel like, are always kind of reaching on him where I want to get him. Maybe this is the benefits of having your rankings in here, because we got him a couple spots earlier than ADP, I believe. Did we? Maybe not by like 4 spots early.
Click on Blinky quickly. Let's see where Burrow went. I think he went above ADP, but I could be wrong. So even though we had Higgins, we didn't get Burrow. But you know what? Burrow probably –
4 spots.
I actually don't think he's a good value at pick 94. I basically only target Burrow when I have a receiver that I want to stack with him, because he's not a particularly mobile quarterback. He's definitely not going to be more mobile this year after his ACL injury. So I think on his own, his actual value, I don't think he's necessarily going to be that high scoring a quarterback, but I think he will have some really nice weeks that correlate with his 3 big receivers. But yeah, I'm totally fine. Like, we missed out on Burrow. It's not the end of the world. I generally wouldn't even take him there or even consider him there unless I have the Bengals receiver.
I feel like I've seen him fall in some more drafts recently. Are we on the clock here in a second? Let's get 9:07 out of the way, and then I'll show you what we got. Or maybe should we? This is such a weird spot in the draft to try to show stuff.
I know. Yeah, I love having the turn pick when I'm sharing strategy, because then you have like 7 minutes in between picks to relax and talk shop. But now
give me the 101
like,
or the 112. The 9:07. We're just like sitting here. All right. let's make this pick. It won't take me long to show you the thing I want to show you. I think you'll find it interesting if you haven't seen it yet. Where do we want to go here with wide receiver? Because this is pretty wild. You have Corey Davis here, which would definitely be ahead of consensus. So we can make the player profiler pick and throw him in there.
Yeah, I don't love Corey Davis here when there's still Zach Moss. I would prefer to just go hyper fragile and get the fourth running back when we're locking up the RB1 on a top 3 offense. And then we don't have to worry about running back, and we can get so many receivers and not have to worry as much.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. I'm about that. That's good. I've been getting some Zach Moss too, so that's a fine strategy. So what we have in here, we're 8 picks away, is the Best Ball Win Rate Explorer. Have you heard of this tool?
I have heard of it. Yeah, let's dive in.
You have heard of it. Yes, let's dive in a little bit here, and I just want to show you one thing real quick once it loads up. Mike Beers made this tool on RotoViz last year. It's a pretty awesome tool. It gives you a lot of stuff to see. So we're just talking about fading later on in your drafts to get stacks. This is it's the Best Ball Win Rate Explorer. It's under the Stack Analysis tab, where it talks about highest upside stacks, safest stacks, and it gives you all stacks. If you notice here, these are all built within the same team. Some of these stacks that you see are quite literally what Josh was just talking about, where you can get more upside when you fade the early positions and take the later ones that try to get upside. You have some of these here. This is for FFP? This is for Best Ball 10s. So these are no kickers, but they do have defenses. But you see here, like the running back 2, you're probably getting later in your drafts. The wide receiver 1, you're not. But the wide receiver 4, defenses, you're never taking early. So here you have late defense, late running back 2, late wide receiver 4. Like these stacks are all like just giving you, some of the highest upside and some of the safest stacks with fading late. So we'll go back here real quick. But I wanted to show that to you because I'm not sure if you've seen that specifically. Would be curious to just get your thoughts on seeing that. But are you even surprised to see that kind of stuff, or does that kind of align with exactly what you were thinking, just in terms of getting those late round picks and finding value there?
Yeah, so that kind of lined up with a lot of my intuition. But I think I've told you before, I'm definitely subscribing to RotoViz at some point this year. Yeah. It just depends when I have a good amount of time to dedicate to like going through the resources. But I keep seeing them on Twitter. And let's make our pick. Should we grab Mike Williams here? Let's find.
We can't.
Did Mike Williams already disappear? Jeez.
Someone got him. All right. If I were to pivot right now, I'd probably go Cole Beasley.
Let's do Cole Beasley. We'll have to grab Jared Cook. We could probably do Jared Cook as our second tight end, actually, with Pitts, if we wanted.
He would be a perfect late round guy because we're not going to want to get too high of ADP invested, I don't think, in our tight end too. And I like Jared Cook. I've had a lot of him so far this year. But no,
the other guy
as far as what you were saying.
And then we can also do Palmer later on. I think Josh Palmer is a really great option where he looks like the clear wide receiver 3 there. I was going to say, what's your promo code? Because I know when I'm signing up, I'm using your promo code for RotoViz.
I'll give you some of that stuff off air. It's not a promo code for RotoViz, so I'll walk you through that stuff to get you set up. I do have a promo code for Underdog, though. You can use promo code Krugs if you are just tuning in. You've not played Underdog before. You can go onto the link that is in the show description on YouTube. I had the link in my bio as well on Twitter. If you click that link, sign up for the first time, Underdog will give you a $25 bonus if you're a first-time depositor. Deposit $10 or more for that $25 bonus with the promo code Krugs. And because I like Josh and I do like RotoUnderworld as well, what's the RotoUnderworld promo code in case they want to take money from me and give it to you guys? I'll go ahead and throw that to you.
Underworld. So Krugs and Underworld.
Krugs and Underworld. We will not have any hurt feelings. At the end of the day, we're just all in this fantasy space together. So we're all friends here. But so definitely, if you're tuning in, if Underdog has you peaked today and your curiosity is peaked, go ahead and check it out. You can find the link and you can use our promo codes Krugs or Underworld, and you can get a $25 deposit or a $25 bonus with a $10 deposit or more for the first time depositors. So real quick, I'm just going to go over our team because we'll be back on the clock in a minute here. We're about to head into the 11th round.
While we're waiting just to make sure. That way we can get him with Hurts. I think we'll take him around pick like 128, I think, or 127. We'll be like right in line with ADP, which is nice.
Yeah, so as long as no one's watching and is about to take him,
someone's for sure trying to snipe us.
This is what happens with ship chasing. I mean, I obviously don't have quite the audience that ship chasing does, but I also don't envy them and watching them get sniped. You said earlier people don't light $25 on fire for the sake of sniping. I can tell you on ship chasing, they do. The audience who tunes in is pretty vicious sometimes with that stuff. So it's always a fun show to tune into and watch that. But real quick, our team, and then we'll make our pick. We have Justin Herbert and Jalen Hurts at quarterback. We went hyperfragile RB with 3 RBs early, and Cam Akers, Najee Harris, DeAndre Swift, and then Zach Moss in the double-digit rounds. Actually, in round 9, we got T. Higgins, Chenault, and Cole Beasley as our 3 wide receivers, and Hall of Famer Kyle Pitts as our tight end. We're about to be on the clock here. Is it Rager if he's still here? And he is.
Yeah, let's grab him because we'll get him like, let's see, I think we're getting him at 127. Yeah.
Yes, we just got him at 127. He's got ADP of 130.9. So that's a pretty good value there. You know, we get a chance to stack him with Jalen Hurts. It's just a piece of that offense. I think that's actually is that our first true stack so far? We didn't get anybody with Justin Herbert just yet, but we will try to later on. You know, we could put Jared Cook in there just so we have him. We just got to make sure we don't get auto drafted.
Yeah, we could have done Mike Williams over Chenault. I don't think Mike Williams quite has the upside that a Chenault has. I think Chenault, if he ends up being the outside wide receiver in that offense, like he might end up being, this guy could just be a total monster. I'm not necessarily sold on Chark as the clear wide receiver 1 there. And even though he missed some games, he was a rookie. He had the most forced missed tackles according to PFF. I know in the player profiler stats he was super high, but I remember seeing PFF tweet that, and I was like, okay, it's not just player profiler that's obsessed with Chenault. Other sites out there, they're charting, and they see that this guy is kind of a unicorn with the ball in his hands. I watched the play he made against the Chargers last year. He had like a 36-yard catch, and he legitimately jukes out 4 or 5 guys that all converge on him at once and gets another 15 yards after the catch and then breaks a tackle. He's built differently. And I mean, anyone that has 700 total yards as a rookie in only 13 games, they're interesting when you're getting that much usage when he was supposedly a gadget player. Gadget players don't just luck into 700 yards as a rookie.
Right. No, I agree with you. I'll speak my piece on that in a second because I do have something I just kind of wanted to add in based on the Urban Meyer narratives. But real quick, we're about to be on the clock again here.
Which receivers do you like? Do you like Aguilar? We have him ranked pretty highly. Let's see who else is up there.
So I'll tell you who I like because I saw someone, and we'd probably be a little bit early on him. Actually, did he just go? Oh, he just went. I was going to tell you Rondale Moore. All right, well, that's out. Would I have been smart if I would have said him? Would you have liked that pick or no?
I do like Rondale Moore, yeah.
So
clearly someone else did too because he went off the board.
That's my consolation prize. At least it gets your stamp of approval. I'm fine with Aguilar. I don't love it. I'd almost rather take a shot on a guy like Paris Campbell, who's got the elite athleticism, and I know he struggles to stay healthy. That might be a little risky here, but it's kind of between Aguilar and Campbell in terms of wide receivers. Do you want to try both?
I think we can get both. I think the ADP gap is enough that I think we can thread the needle and go Aguilar, Campbell, Cook with our next 3 picks.
Let's try to do it. I'm going to put Campbell in there.
I think he was towards the top. There he is.
Yep. I'm going to put him in there. We'll put Cook back there. And then if this goes well, we can just let it auto-draft us so we can get more time to talk shop since we were just this godforsaken middle of the round. But what I was going to say about Chenault, which I think was interesting too, to your point, like you said, he's a weapon. He got a lot of yards as a rookie. That wasn't a mistake. He's gonna. I can't pull up the numbers here, but he's gonna be utilized in the offense in probably a number of ways. And I think one reference I had heard earlier, which I think aligned with some of the pre-draft talk from last season, and then also just what you kind of expect out of Urban Meyer and how we've seen him coach over the years, is how he wanted to possibly find his version of Curtis Samuel, which he had at Ohio State, in terms of the player who can do both the receiving and the rushing. Like you said, he's just a weapon with the ball in his hand. Laviska Shenault can can do a little bit of everything on the field. He's not strictly a receiver. He's a talented ball carrier is what he really is.
Oh, we lost Campbell. Click on Elite One. When did they take Campbell? I think they reached. Oh man,
5 picks.
You would have gotten him like right at pick 150.
So that's that. All right, let's get our bearings here. But no, I'm with you on the Chenault take. I mean, we could take Jared Cook here, and it's not that massive of a reach because we don't want any running backs. I don't think we have our quarterbacks. Like if you kind of just scroll down a little bit, what we're looking at, it's like Jared Cook, unless you want Bryan Edwards.
Yeah, like I'm fine with like Traquan, John Brown, Christian Kirk, Edwards, but I think Cook's fine. It's not too big a reach. And I mean, I think that people are clearly against us.
Yeah.
With some of these picks. So I think they're listening in.
You never know, dude. You never know. Well, that guy's not winning anything. Elite One. I mean, Trevor Lawrence. Roster. He took Derrick Henry first overall. Who does that? Let me ask you who does that. No one does.
Elite One does that. Yeah. So Derrick Henry, the case for Derrick Henry as the 101, there is no case. He had one of the most historic seasons in NFL history with over 2,000 yards and almost 20 touchdowns. And he finished as the RB3 overall, not even per game, overall RB3. Dalvin Cook missed 2 games and still outscored Henry. Like, what are we doing? Why do we think Derrick Henry? I mean, they have Julio Jones.
This isn't standard scoring, bro. This isn't standard scoring. Come on, Elite One.
Yeah, like Henry's not getting 40, 50 catches. The dream is dead there. Henry is like as high floor, low upside of an early pick as you can get based on his profile, where you know he's literally getting 15 to 25 catches. Could even be less for all we know.
Yeah, well, I'm not sure. Actually, I am sure now that I say that because you're one of the ones who participates either. I'm not quite sure if it's the mocking or the support of me, but my love of Darrington Evans. So I think that Darrington Evans is a player who could eat into a pass catching role this year. I think they wanted to get him last year more involved, but things didn't really break right between a weird COVID season. Then he was injured. But I believe if I remember, they spent 3rd round draft capital on him. Like that's not exactly capital you're spending on a player to just not use. I think if things would have broke right for him, if he wouldn't have had a little bad luck along the way, if the season had just been a little different in general, I think Darrington Evans would have probably had more opportunities this season. And then the thing that I pointed out a couple of weeks ago that I think is really crazy with him is his situation is like, you want to talk about situation not changing much. I mean, Brian Hill is there, but outside of that, Brian Hill doesn't scare me in terms of taking work from Evans. Maybe if Henry goes down, you could talk about that. But I think Evans could have a standalone role as possibly a 3-down back if he has a decent camp, because I think the Titans are going to want to see what they can get out of their 3rd round running back who, you know, for lack of a better term, more or less missed most of 2020, whether by way of injury, bad COVID season, not being able to be caught up on camp, whatever. I love Darrington Evans, so I could even see him eating into Henry's workload a little bit. Definitely in the receiving game, maybe even in the running game a hair.
Yeah, Henry feels like the kind of running back that would be affected by the additional game where his usage is so violent. A ton of runs where he's getting tackled by 2 or 3 defenders on the runs. He had nearly 400 carries last year in the regular season. I mean, this is a prime candidate to get 300 carries spread out over 17 games where Evans sneaks in 100, 150 carries next thing you know.
Oh, yeah. Real quick, we have 18 seconds. Another wide receiver.
I love Bryan Edwards. We could also even maybe get him next round if you prefer John Brown in that offense. I know he's ranked similarly on our rankings.
Let's go Bryan Edwards because I don't have much of him.
So what I like about Bryan Edwards is...
We're timing out, so we're going to go with it. But go ahead. You like Bryan Edwards? I know Player Profiler is very high on him.
So the case for Bryan Edwards is that all they did in the receiving game for this year is they lost Aguilar, and then they brought in John Brown. John Brown's skill set is much more similar to Henry Ruggs than it is to Bryan Edwards. Bryan Edwards is 6'3", 212. Have you seen the picture that's on like Instagram and Twitter where he's just flexing, and he looks like a linebacker?
Yes, I
He's
did.
a big dude. And if you scroll down on his player page for a minute, I'll show you the real kicker. Keep going to his college stats. Remember, 6'3", 212. And their special teams yard. This guy was returning punts at 6'3", 212. So they knew he was dynamic and elusive in the open field, and a guy they wanted to get the ball in his hands. You do not see players built like Bryan Edwards getting special teams reps. He also played with Deebo Samuel and broke out before he turned 18. Unbelievable. Look at that. 100th percentile breakout age.
That's pretty incredible. No, I was not even aware of the special team stuff. I knew he had a high target share. I knew he had, basically all the good metrics you would look for in terms of college production, but I did not know that he was a special teamer. So this is, for those tuning in, this is why we have Josh Larky on. He knows his stuff. He is automatic with it. He knows what he's talking about. PlayerProfiler.com, super sharp guy here. We were doing an Underdog Best Ball Mania 2 draft. We just selected Bryan Edwards, who he and all the fine folks at Player Profiler are very high on. We're going to run through our team real quick here. We're about to pick again, Josh. So we have Justin Herbert, Jalen Hurts at our quarterbacks, Cam Akers, Najee Harris, DeAndre Swift, and Zach Moss are our 4 running backs. We are going hyper fragile. It's obviously the strategy of the summer for those who may not be aware yet, but it is a strategy of the summer. We also have our wide receivers, T. Higgins, Laviska Shenault, Cole Beasley, Jalen Reagor, Nelson Aguilar, and Bryan Edwards. And then our tight ends, Kyle Pitts and Jared Cook. I do have to say, in terms of unique teams that I've built, this is like something I'd probably not have built if you weren't on here to help me get off of my convictions a little bit and do some things differently. Where do we want to go right here? Because I think we're probably going another wide receiver.
You want to grab Amon-Ra? I feel like he's slipping a little bit for some reason.
Yeah, we can take him.
Just take and then we'll have potentially 30% or 35% of the Lions targets with Swift and Amon-Ra. So
yeah, he went.
Maybe we'll come back with Tyrell Williams later on, and we'll just say, you know what, we have 60% of the Lions passing game.
Yeah, well, if we take any more Lions, we're gonna have to order around a kneecaps for ourselves after this menu. I think that this is the Dan Campbell special. If we get any more Lions on this roster, where are you looking to go with this next pick here? Because we're kind of at a spot where we've already decided we're done with our running backs. We have 2 quarterbacks who we like. We also have 2 tight ends, and we spent early draft capital on our tight end. Do you have any interest in doing a third tight end or quarterback based on this build, or are we going to stick with the 2 at the onesies positions and just hammer wide receiver until this thing closes out?
So I think we could either go 2-4-10-2 and just hammer 3 more receivers, or because we don't have 2 super good tight ends, we just have Pitts. We could always do a third tight end and then go 9 receivers. I don't think we need another quarterback, though. I just feel like with Herbert and Hurts, those are 2 early round picks, 2 guys that I'm pretty confident are going to be top 6 to top 8 at the position where they're true I think both are going to be true difference makers.
Right. So here's what I'm thinking, because I like what you're thinking with that, and we talked about this off camera. And I'm just going to wait until this next couple of picks comes up here, because I think you're going to be on board with what I'm about to say. If you're looking at it, you might even see what I'm about to say. But I would be interested, if we want to go 3 tight ends, going with Hayden Hurst, getting the Falcons offensive stack, Pitts, Hurts, and then rolling with that. Where are you at on that?
Let's do it. What I like is that I don't think a lot of people are going to do it because they say, oh, you're an idiot. You should never take 2 tight ends on the same team. I don't think they're going to play the same role. I think they're frequently going to be on the field together. And also with Hurst's ADP and how much open receiving work there potentially is, I mean, both these guys could be tight end ones. It could be like an Ertz Goddard type of thing, where the way the roster is shaking up is that it's kind of Ridley and a bag of bones at receiver. Yeah. In terms of talent and experience compared to the rest of the league. So I think if you're going to go 2 tight ends, generally the way that you want to think about it is if you're going 2 players at a similar position on the same team, do you realistically see a world where they both exceed their ADP? Is kind of what you have to think about it. And I see that world where I have Pitts ranked in the high 30s because I think this is the kind of guy that could have 800, 900, 1,000 receiving yards and kind of act like a rookie wide receiver with his usage. And then I could see Hurst just being a quality tight end where he gets 50, 60 catches. There's a world where both Pitts and Hurst pay off at ADP. And I kind of think it's actually the most likely tight end stack on a team that could both pay off at ADP. I know some people like the Jonnu Hunter-Henry one. That's a little weird for me. I don't necessarily trust their quarterback situation. I don't trust that both those guys can get work because they both profile more as traditional tight ends. Whereas Pitts, you can really see him profiling as a lot more of the move guy where he's never in line and he's operating all over the place.
Yeah. Here's a really random question. I'm not sure if you know this or not. Is there any word on whether or not Underdog would change Kyle Pitts' position if he was announced later on in like training camp as a wide receiver? Because I recently saw that the FFPC has considered doing that. Have you seen any of that at all? I legitimately don't know. I'm just a random.
FFPC considers changing him to receiver.
I believe, and I have to find it.
And then we'll.
Yeah, we can. Let's take a look at this real quick. We're probably going another wide receiver here.
If you want to click receivers, who do you like here?
You said Josh Palmer recently, who's not a guy I've been very high on, but he's right there.
So the reason that I like Palmer, I actually don't love the prospect profile, but I think it's fine. We'll stack him with Herbert, and then we have 2 Chargers with Herbert. What I like about Palmer is that wide receiver 3 role is pretty massive in Los Angeles. Jalen Guyton did not deliver. He ran wind sprints, but Jalen Guyton he was top 15 in the NFL in routes run. That's crazy, right?
Right.
Jalen Guyton was like top 15 in like snaps and routes run for the wide receiver position. He's just not any good. I think Josh Palmer can fill that role and be kind of an every down player. They don't really have a tight end necessarily that's going to be on the field 100% of the time. They could even be running some 4 wide receiver sets. Jared Cook at this point in his career, I still think he's fine, but that's not necessarily the kind of guy that you want with 100% snap share. XFL superstar Donald Parham, I don't actually think he's very good. He's a fun guy.
I love that size. He's 6'8" or something like that.
He's 6'8".
I love that size.
He's also built like an NBA forward where he's unbelievably skinny. And I think there's a reason that they kind of cap his snaps. I just don't think this is the type of player that holds up in the NFL. So I really like Josh Palmer to be in an almost every down role, basically what Jalen Guyton was, except just better. I believe the Chargers even had a round 2 grade on him. They were very high on him because he had some standout performances against, I want to say it was Surtain and JC Horn, 2 corners taken round 1 of the draft this year, where he had touchdowns against him in those games, if I remember off the top of my head correctly. So this is a guy that does have some potential, fairly elusive, decently big body. So I didn't love his prospect profile because he didn't have a ton of production with his receiving. But I think the case for him is easy to make, being tethered to Justin Herbert. Yeah,
well, and if I remember correct, and I'll admit, I've already admitted it before. Prospect profiling is not a strength of mine at this point in time in my fantasy journey. That is something that I usually I tend to look at prospects more after they're drafted to their teams, which is why it's always fun having guys like yourself on who clearly you're looking at all of this far earlier than I am. Let's make our last pick real quick.
Who do you want? We could go someone totally random. I've been sold recently on Travis Fulgham, and then we could have 2 of the 3 starting receivers in Philadelphia.
I say let's do Fulgham.
Let's do it.
It's a different lineup. So that's going to be our team. We'll go over it in a second. But yeah, so as far as what you mentioned goes with Josh Palmer, I had just kind of seen the production profile and obviously was not impressed. I just pulled it up here real quick just to take a look at it because I know it wasn't that great. I mean, he never even had 500 receiving yards in college. But then I think where I kind of understood a little bit more when I did some digging, and maybe you know the names of these players better than I do, but Did Tennessee ever have like a true quarterback of note during his time there, or am I just crazy for thinking that I saw that somewhere? Like it just wasn't a thing.
So what you can look at is the target share. So he had an alpha wide receiver type target share his senior year. And yes, we would have liked the earlier breakout, but a 23% target share is nothing to sniff at. So it kind of contextualizes a little bit more, the 475 receiving yards. It's kind of what happened with DJ Moore, where DJ Moore's raw stats in college were not super impressive. And then when you adjusted for that Maryland offense, suddenly you go, oh my goodness, this guy was their alpha receiver as a sophomore. Even though when you see 600 receiving yards, you go, oh, that's not very good. And then you contextualize it.
Yeah. No, that's exactly right. So when I saw that, I thought it was interesting. Athletically speaking, Josh Palmer's not the most impressive, but like you said, he's got a good quarterback that he's with. The Chargers have tried to deploy a usable third wide receiver. I like Jalen Guyton a little bit. I really liked, I believe it was Tyron Johnson a little bit more. I'm not sure if he was just completely terrible off the top of my head. I can't totally remember.
Yeah.
But the fact that they took Josh Palmer in the third round kind of tells you that these guys just don't.
That's what I was thinking.
They're not going to be mattering too much coming up here, I don't think.
Yeah, I think the big thing is that third round draft capital with a little bit bigger bodied than Tyron Johnson. And also Tyron and Guyton were both UDFAs. So,
right.
I mean, whether or not we think they're talented, the NFL didn't really think so. And then if they truly trusted Tyron and Guyton and thought they were both very quality receivers, they wouldn't take a receiver round 3. So that's kind of the thesis behind it. I think Tyron was better than Guyton, if I remember correctly, with advanced metrics.
I think he was, if I remember correctly. We got
let's see, yards per route run. Where is that? That's somewhere on here.
Right here. I got my mouse over it. Under efficiency, third in from the right.
So 2.55. He's not qualified, but that would rank really highly. That's a very efficient number. If we go to Guyton, though, his profile is hilarious. I think he had the worst yards per route run in the NFL.
Let's take a look at this.
If not, he was like the second worst. I think he was like truly like game-breakingly bad efficiency-wise, where if you're top 15 in the NFL in snaps, and I think he had under, let's figure it out.
Look at that snap share, 70, almost 80% on the field.
Look at it. Look at his routes run. 13 in the NFL. There it is. Yeah, I was going to say he was top 15.
Yeah.
13th most routes run of any receiver in the NFL, 77th in targets, 103rd in target share. Jalen Guyton was running wind sprints.
Yeah, it's actually interesting when you see it. We were just on the Tyron Johnson profile. Tyron Johnson had like roughly 450 receiving yards on 26 targets. Jalen Guyton had barely more than him on almost twice as many targets. That's kind of amazing, actually. If you see that, I was not as woke on Jalen Guyton as I think I was. I don't know if did he have like a random stretch where it was like he was being targeted more or something? Because
long touchdowns, which kind of helped him. Yeah, he had like the 91-yard game receiving. Then he had a
it might have been around week
4-yard game
13 where I was kind of like onto him just a tiny bit more because of the targets and maybe I needed a wide receiver or something.
He kind of hurt us in DFS last year. Matt and I were playing him a little bit in DFS because we were like, you know what? He's with a great quarterback. He has a full snap share. And we didn't truly appreciate that he's historically one of the least efficient guys in history. I mean, his yards per route run was below 1. I mean, we saw Tyron Johnson at 2.5 yards per route run. Jalen Guyton was 0.9.
Yeah, let me pull that up again just so we can think.
Yeah, I think he was 100 something.
Yards per route run, was it?
Yeah, if you go to the bottom, I think there were 104 qualified guys, if I remember correctly. And I don't think anyone was close. If I remember correctly, like he was in just a world of his own.
Under a
where
yard per route
no one
run.
was within like 20% as bad as him, if I remember correctly.
I mean, that's pretty embarrassing. He's like a classic, like, a dead clock is right twice a day sort of player. Number 3 in yards per reception, but dead last in yards per route run. Gets all the snaps, runs a load of routes, can't get a catch to save his life. Even if you go back down here, where was it? drops, 11th in the NFL in drops with 7, number 2 in highest drop rate. Like, this guy, he is not what I remember. I don't know why the hell I was high on him, but thank you for this come to Jesus moment. We're gonna embrace Josh Palmer a little bit more going forward, and Jalen Guyton can kick rocks. If I got him anywhere, I'm gonna see what I can get him off my rosters. Maybe I can.
He's so tempting. Yeah, because you see the athleticism, you see that he's an every down player, and then you realize, you know what, his 500 something receiving yards last year was like his ultimate ceiling, because never again will they let a guy be 13th in the NFL in routes run with 55 targets and 28 catches. Like 28 catches.
That's bad.
When you're 13th in routes run, something's wrong here. 511 receiving yards. I mean, he's running more routes than most teams' alpha receiver, and he had 500 yards. It's mind-blowingly bad.
It's like, I mean, maybe that's even an Anthony Lynn thing. We saw Anthony Lynn do a lot of super interesting things in 2020. Most of them not interesting in a good way. Maybe this is like, let's run him out there. Let's just have this guy take the top off of defense. He's going to take away a safety every player. So I don't know the logic behind that. That's pretty.
Just that's a cardio monster. He's just sprinting downfield, knowing he's not going to get targeted, but he's in great shape. This is a fast guy, and he's like a soccer player out there getting like 5-6 miles a game in.
Yeah. He's just, he's on a diet program every time he's out there on the field. Just he's losing a couple pounds. That's pretty amazing. Very good pool. Josh Larky at JLarky Tweets on Twitter of PlayerProfiler and RotoUnderworld. We just spent some time trashing Jalen Guyton, but all in good nature. I'm sure he's a great guy, but we're high on Josh Palmer, so we're going a different direction now. Real quick, let's recap this team, because this is not a team that I would normally build. Again, we were using PlayerProfilers.com's exclusive Underdog Fantasy Best Ball Rankings, courtesy of Josh and PlayerProfiler.com for this draft. Thank you so much for providing that, Josh.
I don't think this is our team.
This is not our team, but
I think it's going to be the top one, maybe.
Okay.
There we go.
I think
all of a sudden I saw Trevor Lawrence, and I was like,
yeah. If you go to the bottom teams in the $5 drafts, I think that's my most recent, but it might be different this way. But this is our team. So again, Player Profiler Rankings. This is a team unlike most that I have built. So a lot of fun to kind of do this team with Josh here. For quarterbacks, we went with Justin Herbert and Jalen Hurts. They were actually back-to-back quarterback picks there, which is kind of fun to do. Usually I'm getting one early and getting the other one around 9 or 10. So that was fun to do. Running backs, we went 3 out the gate with Cam Akers, Najee Harris, and DeAndre Swift. We came back with Zach Moss. Josh pointed out that having the starting running back in a top 3 offense is never a bad thing to do, which Zach Moss is exactly that for the Buffalo Bills. Hopefully he will be a nice little bit of padding to the floor of what we hope is a high ceiling, hyper fragile running back build. For our wide receivers, obviously when you go hyper fragile running back, you're going to have a lot of these guys. We have T. Higgins, Laviska Shenault, Cole Beasley. We actually even did a little Bill stack there now that I see it. Cole Beasley, Jalen Reagor, Nelson Aguilar, Bryan Edwards, Amon-Ra St. Brown, Josh Palmer, who we just talked about, and Travis Fulgham. And with our tight ends, we went Kyle Pitts, Jared Cook, and Hayden Hurst. We do have a couple stacks in here of Atlanta. The Chargers we have with Cook, Palmer, and Justin Herbert. We snuck in a Philly stack with Fulgham, Reagor, and Hurts. And the other one I just pointed out was the Bills. I think that was it for the stack. So, and then the Detroit stack, we have every Lion.
We have 2 Lions, don't we, or 3 Lions? 2 Lions, I think. We have Swift and Amon-Ra.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So this is a team that we got here for the draft tonight. It is projected at 2,761 total points, but these projections tend to not really reward too many late players who we're obviously a little bit higher on. So I'm not going to worry too much about the projection.
They generally reward 3 quarterbacks from what I've seen.
They do.
I think Underdog is working on how to account for 3 quarterbacks. I've noticed that when I have a 3 quarterback build, it's almost always towards the top of the projected points. So
yeah, and I have a lot of Jameis Winston teams too, and because they don't even have him like projected as like the full-time starter, so some of my scores are like low on that. They just about split Jameis and Taysom Hill 50-50. So I'm not getting a lot of high scores there. But yeah, overall, I like this team. Josh, it was a lot of fun to draft this. What's your takeaway on this? Is this am I going to be coming out to meet you out west to hand you your share of $101 million?
I certainly hope so. It looks like a team that's definitely ready to take first or second place, because that's really what you want is, it's great to draft for ceiling or to get the sexy stacks. But at the end of the day, like, anything can happen in a tournament. And the biggest thing that you can work to control is having a good team through 13 weeks, because that's what round one is. It's 14 weeks now. We have a 17 game season with 18 weeks. So the first, it should be 14 weeks or round one. And then there's week 15, 16, 17 for the next 3 rounds. I think it looks pretty good. I mean, we have some sneaky stacks. We have a super strong running back core. We have 9 receivers. So I think we can get some good spike weeks there. One thing that I'll mention, just a little plug for someone completely unaffiliated with our operation. I'll tell you about the Fulgham pick a little bit and why I've warmed up to it. So Scott Connor of DLF was messaging me recently, and he was saying that he'd listened to the Roster Watch podcast, super sharp guys over there, and they brought on an Eagles beat guy. And he was saying that all the talk coming out of Eagles camp right now is that they want 11 personnel to be their primary offensive package. Okay. And that means that Fulgham is going to be getting starter snaps, and that this new regime truly believes and appreciates Fulgham's talent, because it was a little bit weird last year. I mean, this was a guy that took the NFL by storm. He had a 100-yard game. He had several other games with 60, 70, 80 receiving yards. And then the final month of the season, he barely played.
Yeah.
And it wasn't entirely clear why. We can actually pull up his game log, and then you can see how all of a sudden he's hyper productive, and then the snap share dropped. But apparently the word in Eagles camp right now is that they do want to trade Zach Ertz and run a lot of 11 personnel. So if we scroll to the top, we can get the game log for him.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I'm looking at college stuff here. All right, game log for Travis Fulgham.
So he has 4 straight games over 70 receiving yards. And then he has what looks like 2 bad games that are potentially on Wentz, where he has 75 air yards and 99 air yards on 5 and 7 targets with a full snap share, just doesn't bring them in. Very likely inaccurate targets from Wentz. And then they go, oh, no. We're slashing your playing time, even though the entire offense was not firing then. So it's a little bit suspicious, and it makes me believe that there's still potential with him, because he was so productive initially when called upon with a pretty good profile. This is a fairly large athletic guy, a decently polished route runner as well. I mean, Joe Hayden is no joke. And if Joe Hayden's the primary corner locking on him, Jimmy Smith's no joke. Jason Verrett is no joke. And if he's putting up good games against these guys, I mean, this is an actual real NFL talent. He looks like a fine wide receiver 3 in an offense.
It's interesting, too, as I'm looking at it here. I just want to pull this up because I noticed the game was missing, and I'm guessing it's going to be because he was injured and missed a game. Did he miss a game by injury, or did they just sit him? Because I believe they played the Saints in Jalen Hurts' first start, and I'm not seeing the Saints game on there, which I'm guessing may have been week 14. So he could have even been injured in week 13 and then missed week 14 and returned, but maybe wasn't even completely healthy. Obviously, that's just kind of, a little bit of speculation. And that's also around the time when Hurts became the full-time starter for the remainder of the season. Maybe they switched up their offense. Also, we know that Doug Peterson was just kind of playing silly ball those last couple of weeks, including benching Hurts for whoever that third-string quarterback was, whose name I can't remember. I'm sure any Philly fan could probably tell me who he was. But there was a lot of things not going right in Philly that last month of the season. Clearly, like you said, the snap share dropped off in a big way. I'm even speculating maybe a week 14 injury could have even led to that snap share drop now that I'm just looking at things. But no, I think Fulgham, if the rumors out of camp are true that they want to do 11 personnel, he had a lot of productive weeks, like Josh pointed out, high target volume, good yards, plenty of air yards. He even scored in 3 weeks out of the 4 during his little hot streak that he had there. He was kind of just like at times he felt like a meme player, and then other times he just felt like he was a legitimate threat to be a weekly wide receiver one. So in a lot of ways, I don't think that this Eagles offense is going to – I'm sorry, I don't think this Eagles defense is going to be that great in some areas. And then I think that there's also going to be times where they could be a solid team that's going to find themselves in shootout with teams like Dallas. So, dude, Fulgham as a last pick is not a guy who I hate at all. I think he could be a lot of fun to have on this team. I think it's a fun team in general. There's a lot of players who I don't normally draft here. So even the uniqueness of the Kyle Pitts and Hayden Hurst stack is a fun thing. But no, I really appreciate it. I appreciate you coming on. Josh, you want to tell people one more time where they can find you, all the great things that you're doing before we get out of here?
Sure. Yeah. First off, thanks for having me, Zach. This was awesome. I've actually thought about doing some draft live streams. And if or when I do, I've got to have you on. That way you can bully me into a 0 RB build to get back at me. So that'll be a lot of fun because I do those occasionally, but very, very occasionally. So it'll be a lot of fun to have someone on who has a lot more experience with that than I do. If you want to find me, just go to Twitter at JLarkyTweets. You can see it in this stream, JLARKY tweets. And all my work is on PlayerProfiler.com. I do a lot of the work with projections. So all of our world famous draft kit projections, I'm behind those. And we have a lot of really cool projects that will be coming out over summer. So stay tuned and you can follow the action on Twitter.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Again, he is JLarkyTweets on Twitter. Josh Larky of RotoUnderworld and PlayerProfiler. Thanks so much, Josh, for joining us. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in tonight on this episode of Roster Locked. We will be back on Saturday with special guest Sean Siegel of RotoViz as we look to tackle an FFPC best ball tournament draft. You're not going to want to miss that. And again, just thanks to everybody. We look forward to seeing you next week. Have a good evening.